Hi. In this video, I want to show you how I redesigned these gun sounds from Doom Eternal using libraries from Slava Pogorelsky. I'm going to be using specifically the Steampunk Vintage Machinery and Mechanisms, Resonating Metal Force, and Evil Strings Tortured Wires libraries. And before I start, I want to thank Slava Pogorelsky for sending these over for me. There's a lot of very impactful and satisfying stuff in there, which makes them perfect for big, larger-than-life designs like this one. And the range of sounds makes them great for throwing into big effects chains and experimenting. Here's some of my favourite sounds from these libraries. First, for the shotgun, I wanted to make something that was super compressed and beefy, so I'm using a lot of distortion and subsynth to make things just washed out and crunchy. For the transient layer, I have these impacts that were from one of the mechanical loops that I've pitched down and used mvocoder on to make them sound more like synthetic kicks, with some EQ and distortion to make them fatter. The next transient layer is from a design hit from the strings library. I'm crunching it up with subsynth, then doing some pretty harsh transient shaping. These two sounds are being processed together. They're more string impacts because some of the abstract bass hits have some super nice transients to them that I couldn't stop using. The body of the sound only really has one layer. It's these metal wires impacts, which have been pitched down. Then I'm taking out the highs to stop them from sounding too metallic, distorting them twice, and using Sheen Machine as free and relatively new. I'm not really controlling the low end at all here, because I like how powerful it sounds, and I'm deliberately playing it slightly later than the transient layer to keep them from getting in the way of each other. Lastly, this tail sound that I made from these metal impacts that had a nice kind of shouty sound when I layered them. I added vibrato because I thought it made it a bit more believable as a tail, then RX dehum to take out that boomy fundamental, and after that it's just a lot of pitch shifting, EQ and reverb to get it in the frequency range that I want, as well as some mid-side EQ to make it a bit wider at the end. The mech parts of the sound are all from the Steampunk library. There's loads of super satisfying thunks and clicks in the design section that really sell this as a real object that's mechanically responding to the player input. So I'm using a combination of bigger movements that kind of crunch up nicely with everything else once it gets compressed, as well as this little metal hit that plays right before the actual transient group, which gives the shot a lot more of a bright, aggressive start and makes it sound more convincing as a real gunshot. There's also this group for when the shotgun gets racked and the cylinder moves. There's a lot of really nice thumpy low end in these recordings, especially the clocks. They have some really nice satisfying metallic sounds. Altogether, I'm processing with Panks to do some transient shaping and compression, then M compressor just to squeeze out a bit more loudness so it's fully flattened, just like the original game. Ozone is doing more subtle EQ and making the low end mono, and then I have this exterior convolution reverb at the end of all the guns, just to place it in the space a bit more, so together the shotgun sounds like this. There's a lot of similar techniques being used for the heavy cannon, but I'm keeping it a bit less blown out because it's an automatic weapon, so everything needs to be a bit more readable and contained for each shot. The transient layer here is made up from two different recordings of this bench grinder, which are being put through vocoders again to give them a cleaner low end, then some EQ and transient shaping alongside Sheen Machine again, because they needed some brightness after being vocoded. Then they're going into subsynth just to give them some more power because they were getting lost against the body layers, and they're the real driving force at the low end of this sound. The body layer is two different groups, both of which are impacts from the horror strings library again. This first one is more focused on the initial hit of the rifle firing, so it has some more extreme transient shaping, and after distorting with subsynth, I'm high passing it so I can keep all that high mid crunch. The second layer here is more of a satisfying blown out layer, so I have these metal wires impact again, going through vibrato to make each one a little bit different, then subsynth, transient shaper and decapitator to get it nice and distorted. Then another high pass just to make sure that the low end of each shot is super snappy and clear. You can see here that I'm doing a little bit of volume automation on the body group just at the end of each shot to make them more distinct and make sure they don't blend into one another. The tail layer is actually using the same effects chain as the one for the shotgun, but it's pitched a bit lower and I'm using longer recordings, so they create a kind of bed behind the shots, as if they're all ringing out over each other. The mech layer here is giving the sound a lot more brightness and complexity, with these bench grinder recordings used again alongside more clock mechanisms to give the shot another transient that's a bit delayed from the actual shot, so it almost sounds like that front end of the gun that reciprocates slightly after the shot. These more bright tonal layers are giving the overall design a bit more character, and it gives your ear something to latch onto because they kind of cut through the mix. They both have vibrato as a lazy way of adding pitch variation, and this high one is pitch shifted down so it can keep the same timing without being super grating and piercing. Overall, the mech group is being high passed and pitched down a bit so it sounds a bit more fat and powerful. The heavy cannon as a whole is going through Decapitator at about 40% mix first, just to muddy it up slightly because it sounded too clean and the individual components weren't really sounding cohesive, so this is gluing them all together. Panks, Convology and Ozone are being used here in pretty much the same way as with the shotgun, but I also have DB Comp before Ozone just to squash it all down and keep the levels more consistent across the shots. Lastly, I have some volume automation that accentuates the first shot in each burst, similar to how a lot of guns work in games, so that you get that instant satisfying feedback without having the gunshots be super loud all the time. So overall, the heavy cannon sounds like this. Onto the Ballista. This one has some more extreme processing on it for all the swirling energy in the charge up. First, these kind of wet energy sounds are mainly made from those double bass hits again, just because they have so much nice movement. And they're being layered up with some more tonal double bass recordings, with some pitch automation to make them stand out more. Processing wise, I'm high passing. It's then going into a vocoder with this frequency graph at the bottom activated to accentuate the high end on the processing. Filter Freak is taming the very top end because it was sounding too metallic again, and I wanted the emphasis here to be mainly on the low mids. Using Filter Freak rather than just like a shelf EQ here means that at the points where it's the most intense, the highs can still come through, so it's kind of more adaptive. Kilohertz Flanger is giving it a lot of movement and making it a little bit more sci-fi. Then Decapitator and Squash are gluing it all together, making it super fat and a bit more messy, which makes it sound a bit more convincing and real, I think. Then Ozone is just doing some final EQ and making it a bit narrower in the stereo field. Overall, it sounds like this. The other heavily processed layer are these little clicks, which correspond to the Ballista's arms opening and closing. They were made by taking a tiny piece of one of the string recordings and putting it through Echo Boy, with Devil Lock afterwards to kind of flatten all the delays so it sounds like a single sustained sound. I put a vocoder and frequency shifter on it, and then when I tried to use a transient shaper with the attack turned down, it gave me these really nice clean clicks in the left ear. So I bounced them out, put them through another rack to clean them up and bring out the clicky parts only, with RxD clicks set to output only clicks so that it kind of fully isolates them, and some spin tracer to give it a bit more movement. So, after bouncing those out, I placed them around the big mechanical movements that the gun does, as well as making this constant bass layer that gets pitched up with every movement so it feels like the weapon's getting more powerful. Onto the actual sound of the shot itself, I have more metal and string impacts layered up, just with some transient shaping in this cadence that kind of splits the shot into two halves. The body layer has these bits of strings and metal that give it more complexity, but it's mainly based around this super crunchy layer. That's a designed double bass impact again that I've just pushed super hard into Little Radiator, as well as this very clean metal resonance that gives the tail a nice, powerful fundamental. They have some ensemble and sheen machine to give them a little bit more presence in the full mix too. I also have this whooshy high group that's made up of one of these air bursts from the Steampunk library, as well as this metal hit that has some ring mod and OTT to make it super fizzy, so it kind of complements the cleaner sound of that first layer. As well as this other metal transition that has decapitator, tremolo and reverb to flesh out the tail of the shot and make it more noisy. It's kind of meant to be the sound of the projectile itself as it flies away from you. This tonal group is made up of this laundry rack rattle that had a really nice kind of panicked sounding resonance when you pitch it up about 3 octaves with some distortion. Then I have these resonating metal string rattles that I put through a rack from another redesign I did, which is mainly just 2 delays set really short so they both give it a tone and kind of resonate off of each other, alongside a bit more ensemble Valhalla space modulator, distortion and ratio. So in the end it sounds like this. Next I have this layer which is like a darker version of that other noisy tremolo layer. It has similar processing, but Filter Freak is taming those highs because I already have loads of high-end stuff in the shot at this point. Finally, these 2 metal resonances with some similar processing, so tremolo, distortion and chorus, as well as some pitch automation to give them more character. The whole tonal stack has ensemble as well as a reverb and a high pass to glue it all together, and it sounds like this. The final group here is the mechanical stuff. For the charge up, I'm using these typewriter recordings as little risers into the main clunks, which are a combination of more clock recordings and these chaotic impacts, which are really nice and beefy. I have another one of them after the last part to signify it's at full charge, alongside some more little bright clicks to make it stand out more, and convince you that there's kind of more movement happening that you're not seeing within the gun. The mech layer for the shot itself is similar, but I have this super loud clock impact that I just moved there at the last minute because it gives the shot a load of brightness and makes it sound a lot more dangerous, I think, when it's all being compressed and distorted together. I have some automation on both a high pass and kilohertz stereo, so that as the charge progresses, it gets wider and has more low end. So it sounds more powerful and kind of builds anticipation for the shot. On the whole stack for the Ballista, I have Panks again, which is just clipping the very top end, as well as reducing the input volume and accentuating that transient. Then M compressor again, just because it makes the initial kind of whack of the shot way more powerful and brings out all the nice detail in the tail. Then Ozone and Convology doing the same thing as they were with the other guns. So overall, the Ballista sounds like this. Now for my thoughts on these libraries. I think there's a load of really good stuff in there. I never ran out of interesting impacts or textures or tones when I was pulling things in to make this redesign, and the design sounds in all 3 libraries are super useful for just pulling in and getting inspired immediately. I also love the amount of unique recording and excitation techniques that are being used across all the libraries, which really makes them stand out as different from the other ones in my collection, and gives me a lot more stuff to play with when I'm running them through effect racks like I was doing here. If I had to give a criticism, I wish some more of the sounds in steampunk machinery had more obvious variations, because there were some times when I wanted a recording that was just slightly different to the one I was using for one shot, and sometimes there wasn't anything that was only slightly different. Overall, I really enjoyed experimenting with these libraries, and again, I want to thank Slava Pogorelsky for sending them over. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.